Hello, and welcome to the Capital Gains Show. My name is Aaron, and today I am graced again with the presence of my good friend Z, who agreed rather to come on to the show and do another friendly debate with me. Today, we decided to discuss the topic of China. It's a hot topic right now. Everyone knows that China's economy is on the uptick. They're doing great. They're getting rid of poverty. They're increasing their prosperity. The question here is China considered more of a capitalist economy or more of a socialist or communist economy? That's a big question, and there's a lot of layers to it, and we're going to tear into it and do as deep of a dive as we can. Of course, I'll be taking the pro-capitalism side. Z is going to be taking the pro-communism side. And with that, Z, why don't you give us a quick introduction and tell us what you think about the debate topic?
Sure. Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure. And like with regards to China, right? I believe the issue is more complex than capitalism versus communism, right?
Sure.
They have a communist party, right? That doesn't mean they're entirely It doesn't mean they've achieved communism yet, right? It means that they're building socialism within the nation, and that requires stages of development. They've only now just achieved poverty elimination, like extreme poverty, right? They've gotten rid of extreme poverty through developing their means of production, right? Like not necessarily cooperatives. What I mean is like they've advanced their means of production, like their productive forces.
Yeah.
Like you remember from our previous discussion, right? Like how they continuously try to innovate and advance their productive force and everything, right? That's what they've been doing, right?
Yeah.
So like they're moving on to the other phase of socialism, right? In which like their previous special economic zones, right, which they allowed free reign in markets and everything to like transition into higher forms of socialism. So that's my take at it. What's yours?
You know what, that I like the nuance in there. I like the recognition that it's not just some monolith, that there's complexity involved, and that and that it's not a simple, easy answer. And I think you and I have common ground on in that regard. I would agree with you that it's a complex question. It's not black or white. There's several shades going on. I also agree with you, and I love agreeing with my opponents as much as I can, right? But I also agree with you that they're entering a higher phase of production. Their productive capacity and their prosperity accordingly is going up in like it's like they're leveling up, right, in the video game, and their power levels increasing, that kind of thing. Now they're unlocking the special moves. So what I see in China is a country that, well, when they first underwent their revolution in the 50s, and the Communist Party became the party of power, and then Mao had his great leap forward, and then Mao passed away, and from there, what I see, from what I've read, is that China, after Mao's death, started slowly liberalizing their economy in certain aspects, not entirely, right? Obviously, it's still like a one-party state, and the Communist Party still controls many of the factors of the means of production. But what I see in terms of how their power level has gone up and how their prosperity level has gone up has been correlated with the opening up to foreign trade, to foreign companies operating in the country, to a certain degree of private property ownership. Of course, the private property rights there are a little bit less than they are in the West. But in terms of the recent history of the country, they, from what I can see, they have trended towards greater degrees of capitalist style private property rights. I've read a lot of people on the left saying that, well, this is just a natural phenomenon. Marx talked about this. You go through a stage of capitalism, and then you transition into a higher plane of existence, which would be the socialist plane, and then after that, the communist plane. I mean, that's a charitable way, for I think for the left to save face about their ideology, being able to take credit for much of the progress. What I see is the capitalist activity intensifying, not decreasing. And if someone says, well, you have to increase the capitalism to X, degree before you can do the socialism, that kind of starts leaning. That reminds me of the arguments like, well, we can have communism after the capitalism achieves post scarcity. It's like, okay, now you can have communism after capitalism wins the battle of which ideology is the better one, and then you can only have the communism after goods and services are so plentiful that what kind of property rights are existing don't even matter anymore. It becomes irrelevant because you're so post scarcity. It's China's definitely severely decreased the amount of poverty they have in society. It's been like and it's been so fast how they've done it. I think they've probably decreased their poverty rates faster than any Western country has, up until this point. They really took advantage of global trade and finding efficiencies in terms of where to best, direct labor and so on. But let me give you an example, let me get away from the abstract for a minute and give you like a more concrete example. A large portion of what I do to make a living involves buying products in China, and I resell them in the USA and Canada. That's probably like, about 80% of what I do. And when I buy products from China, there's several factories that make the type of product that I buy. And I usually shop around for quality and price, and I talk to their salespeople and so on, right? I'm sure you've heard of Alibaba, which is kind of like the large scale Chinese version of Amazon, but it's more for like resellers and wholesalers, right? But it's a wonderful website, and there's so many providers of high quality products on there. But here's what I notice in the real world is when I think about China and how much communism there is, or how much socialist, mode of production is versus how much capitalist mode of production there is. Every time I buy something in China, I'm buying it from a privately owned for-profit company. I can't even find a worker co-op over there or a not-for-profit, like collectively owned company that I can buy these products from. They don't exist. Now, I do know that the Communist Party does hold, the state over there does hold a significant portion of the means of production. So it was like 20 or 28% or something like that, which is higher than what you would see in the USA. But when it comes to like the goods and services that consumers use, that most people use, the majority of the time, you're going to get them from China, from a for-profit, privately owned, type of company, because it seems to me like the capitalist portion of the Chinese economy is growing faster than the public portion of the Chinese economy. Anyway, enough of me talking. What's your response?
Well, I have to clarify a few things, right? Um, when Deng, right, like he adopted the new policy, right? The opening up the markets and whatnot. He didn't exactly liberalize it. I could read you his quote if you want. I'll share my
Please.
screen. All right. Um, that way, like the viewers get to see as well. He said, what is socialism and what is Marxism? We are not quite clear about this in the past. Marxism attaches utmost importance to developing the productive forces. We have said that socialism is the primary stage of communism, and that at the advanced stage, the principle of from each according to his ability and to each according to his needs will be applied. This calls for highly developed productive forces and an overwhelming abundance of material wealth. Therefore, the fundamental task for the socialist stage is to develop the productive forces. The superiority of the socialist system is demonstrated in the final analysis by faster and greater development of those forces than under the capitalist system. As they develop, the people's material and cultural life will constantly improve. One of our shortcomings after the founding of the People's Republic was that we didn't pay enough attention to developing the productive forces. Socialism means eliminating poverty. Pauperism is not socialism, still less communism. That was a speech discussing Marxist theory at the Central Community, yada, 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 right?
Looks like in
Uh,
1984.
yep,
Yeah.
1984.
This is a good quote, that's a good quote.
Mhm.
And I like that quote for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that a lot of what he says, speaks to my heart, like improving
Yeah.
material wealth. It's, of course, he's talking about like eliminating poverty, but you could, when you say like, increasing productive capacity and improving, prosperity faster than capitalism can, it makes me think like, well, shit, if you've got something that's even faster than capitalism, then sign me up, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
of course I would, I would disagree. Well, it's not really socialism, that's capitalism. And then but here's something interesting about 1984, the year, not the book.
Yeah.
uh China, now Mao passed away in 1976, and then after that it was D is his name, right? D
No, Dung. It's pronounced
Dung.
D-E-N-G.
Dung. I'm
It
bad
means
enough with
spelled
English
D-E-N-G.
names.
Yeah.
Like I'm terrible at remembering English names, so remembering foreign names is even harder for me.
Yeah.
So Deng was the guy that came into power after Mao passed away, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And he was in power for a while, I think until the late 80s or the early 90s, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I was in some of my research that I did before we started our debate today. One of the things I noticed when it was talking about China's economic changes since the passing of Mao, it mentioned that China had a ban on private farming until 1982, and a ban of some other types of private production kind of industries. And then in 1982, they allowed limited amounts of private farms. There would still be like state quotas, and you would have to sell a certain amount of crop to the state and so on. But ever since that 1982 shift happened, the farm industry in China has slowly inched towards a more marketized and more private property permissive kind of system, and they've benefited for it. They eat more calories than ever before. They can export more food than before. They import less food than before. Um, so Dung was talking about a really cool idea that I think everyone can get behind, about the increased prosperity and lowered poverty of a society. But it seems to me like even though he says, oh, socialism is what's going to achieve that, it looks like they've gone more in the direction of copying what other open market, laissez-faire, kind of private property tolerating, countries have done. um I mean, if you take his quote and think about the socialist aspect that he's assigning to the prosperity, what Chinese firms can we point to that are worker owned co-ops, or even like the state owned firms, and say, oh, that particular company has like, done a lot of international trade, or that company's famous for, these products that everyone around the world enjoys. Man, almost everything in my house is made in China, but barely any of it is made by a state-owned, company. What do you think about that?
Well, here's the thing, right? Marxism isn't exactly as dogmatic as anarchists online and whatnot, right? I'm not talking about you, but like ANCOMs and mutualists and whatnot, right? They have this very dogmatic view, right? That like worker co-ops are going to save us. It's going to save everything, right? But they fail to understand the underlying mechanics behind how finance works and everything, and how you're going to transition from capitalism to socialism. It's not that capitalism and socialism are exactly opposite things, right? Or that you can't go from capitalism to socialism, right? The thing is, right, you have to address the societal and like, because capitalism didn't spring out of nowhere, right? Like it developed from it developed
I've been
like
told like English property
yeah.
laws that changed a couple hundred years ago or something like that, and then
Yeah.
and then it spread
Mhm.
around the rest of the world. That's what some people have been saying.
So, I mean, like, also capitalism is dominant in the world, right? You can't
Yeah,
just switch to worker co-ops or get rid of markets and whatnot. Otherwise, you risk cutting yourself off from resources. You can't
yeah,
just do that on a whim, right? And I
sure.
mean, like, I have to apologize to you about our previous discussions on Facebook groups when I was an anarchist, because I was also dogmatic in that regard, right? Like the whole thing about Marxism, right, is like it seeks to change the nature of the political and economic sphere so that the people are actually in power. You can still keep markets, but the people must like command the market and shape it so that it benefits them. That's the whole gist of it. Like the that's the whole gist of Marxism as I understood it, right? Like it took me a lot of like reading and theorizing to like get it right. It's um like the basics of it, right? It's that like the popular masses must be the masters of both government and of the economy. So markets must be made to work for us, and government must be made to work for us as well. So in terms of Marxist governance, right? What distinguishes Marxist governance from, let's say, liberal governance in America or Canada, right? Is that like in American Canada, you have election every 4 years. There's a new clown to fuck up what the other clown did,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Yeah, but like in Marxism, there's a party leader, right? And there's party members, right? They're working class. They could be specialized, right? There's nothing wrong with specialization like in terms of Marxism, right? Because
yeah,
because you don't want to give a really specialized role to any schmuck, right? Right, and
yeah.
like the thing is, right, they develop long-term goals, right? The goal isn't just short-term profit, it's long-term goals, right? So that you could get long-term profits out of it, everyone could get long-term profits out of it, right? It's like you can run your business, right, but you have to follow our rules. And like from what I heard in China, right, recently the market group within the CPC, right, they're losing ground. It's like the higher stage of socialism crowd is gaining more traction. And
Huh.
he also like, have you heard of the Alibaba guy? What was his
Jack
name?
Ma.
Yeah, yeah. He got in some hot water recently, and so did a top banker. He actually got executed, the top banker, for accepting bribes.
Yeah, I read a headline or something about
Yeah,
a bribery scandal, right?
yeah,
So yeah, obviously corruption's a bad thing no matter who
hmm
does it, no matter
yeah.
what ideology does it. Execution
Corruption
sounds pretty
kills.
intense, but
Yeah,
that's what they want to
yeah,
do.
yeah. I mean, corruption kills it. Yeah, it leaves people destitute, right? And
Yeah,
it's a really big crime. And
yeah.
also in Marxist governance, right? Politicians are recallable at any point in time. So, like if
So do they have a fairly? 'Cause I actually honestly have no idea about this. How the recall process happens in the Chinese government? Is it a relatively straightforward affair where your ass is at risk of being recalled easily if you do something bad or corrupt? In America, at least, you got to like get petitions signed by X percentage of voters, and it's this whole big pain in the ass. They're trying to recall Gavin Newsom as the governor of California, and I know that's like this huge signature drive, and then you put it on a ballot and blah blah blah. So if the recall process is a little bit easier over there, I would say that would be an advantage for their political system.
yep, it's like you get to weed out the inefficiencies basically, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I like the idea of faster, more adaptable governance, even though I'm not a fan of government in general. Obviously, the governments that are less less calcified and more living and breathing and more moving, you know what I mean? Those would be the ones that you would expect to see produce better results for their societies that they govern, obviously. Yeah. Okay, so I want to get back to a second ago what you said about Marxism not being dogmatic, and you also touched on this idea during our first debate, and I find it refreshing to hear. I like the idea of Marxism being adaptable, being looking towards the long-term future, towards like stages of production, towards leveling up, to use that gaming analogy again. I like how you said that too many people mistake Marxism for being dogmatic. I'll admit that I'm guilty of, as charged of that as well. At least the amount of Marx that I've read, and it may be because I spent too much time around too many hardcore, as red color aesthetic loving tankies, that their interpretation, of Marx has been rather dogmatic. But apparently that's not necessarily so. You seem to be much more of an adaptive minded type of Marxist. I don't think you're like the tanky type. Maybe I'm wrong there, but you seem less dogmatic than those chaps, which is cool. And if Marxism, if let's say for a moment that China is doing a better interpretation and a better application of Marxism than any other government has done before. And one of the reasons they're doing a better application of Marxism is because they're being less dogmatic, they're being more adaptable, they're having more of a global minded, interactive, economic kind of mindset. Then first of all, I like that. But second of all, when I think of it becoming more adaptive and so on, I'm saying I think, well, now we're getting to the point uh, where it's becoming closer to the capitalism, at least the kind of capitalism that I envision, which is like, maximum market adaptability and creative destruction and competition and all those things and customer choice. And one day you're the richest guy on top of the world, and then the next day you're bankrupt because you didn't adapt. Capitalism is famous for that kind of activity. If Marxism is gaining economic strength and prosperity by using a similar form of adaptability, then what I'm seeing is the gap, the chasm between the capitalism and communism is narrowing, right? Which I'm a bottom unity fan. I'm a fan of the left and right coming together to fight the authoritarianism, the fascism, and that kind of stuff. So I would cheer that kind of narrowing of the divide. You know what I mean? What do you think of that?
Well, I have many objections, right? Like,
Okay, I got some objections from you now. Good.
yeah. So I mean, I don't really buy into that political spectrum thingy.
Oh, you don't like
Like,
the compass? But the
uh,
memes are so funny.
yeah, the memes are funny, obviously, right? But like, it's not really an accurate way of determining political structure or whatnot, right?
Okay.
Because I mean, as I mentioned previously, right? And I mean, like, I have to emphasize it, right? It's like, um, development happens in stages, right? Even capitalism had its own developments.
Yeah.
It began as an agrarian development, right, and then moved on to industrial capitalism, and now it's it's a weird zombie thingy. It's like it's called financial, like it's capitalism nowadays. What it's doing, right? It's financializing in the first world, right, like global north, right, and it's moving its industries to the global south, right, and
Hmm.
it's sapping money through there, right. Imperialism is an absolute essential quality of capitalism. You may disagree with me there, considering your position, but
Mhm.
like, without imperialism, capitalism cannot sustain itself. It's got too many contradictions. Um,
Mm.
like, I agree with you that like Marxism bridges the gap in between them, right? And I mean, there really is no such thing as tanky, by the way. That's just a slur that was invented by
I know it's just a pejorative people like to throw around on, but
yeah.
well,
um,
I was using that as just a way to mock the more dogmatic aspect of the left,
yeah.
which you don't
Hmm.
seem to subscribe to as much, right?
Hmm.
You're more in the
Yeah.
flexibility thing.
I mean, people have the right to be absolutely furious about how the American government and neoliberals handle crises like the coronavirus pandemic, and like how the how they're so dogmatically stuck where they don't want to move away from whatever system they want to be in, right? Like capitalists are not necessarily bad people. They're just playing the rules of the game. The rules of the game can be changed at any moment in time, right? Um, but like capitalism must eventually become socialism if people want to decide to like accept the democratic nature of like socialism completely. Like capitalism either teeters towards fascism or socialism. It's not an eternal thingy, right?
Mm,
um Capitalism's not eternal. It doesn't last forever. Like it's the same with feudalism or monarchies, or they're not eternal. Eventually they must adapt with the times, right? And
mhm,
like the way I see it, right, is like we can work together with certain capitalists to ensure that this change happens without much death. But a revolution is still like inevitable, right? Either it
mhm.
goes to fascism or socialism. Like if people reject democracy completely, it goes to fascism, or if they embrace it completely, it goes to socialism. Um, but like we're nowhere close to abandoning markets, by the way. Like it
Yeah, it doesn't
mm,
seem like we are.
yeah, no, because like if you think about it, right, like you need the mass approval of the majority of the population to do that, and most people are content with the way they live, like
At least with the
eh,
market aspect, I think
yeah.
you're right.
Mhm.
I would say that there's more. Correct me if you disagree, but I would say that you're right, and that I see it too. I at least see more general approval of markets in themselves than I see general approval of private ownership of the means of production. Right.
Yeah,
So a lot of and that's why there's like the market socialism thing is also kind of hot right now, at least on the internet. A lot of people go, look, we don't want private accumulation of capital, but we do like markets. And I'm like,
yeah.
well, that doesn't sound quite as bad.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like take the case of big pharma, for example, right? Like they continuously increase the price of their products, right, beyond what is affordable, right? But they have not innovated anything. The CEOs, they profit though. So
Yeah,
I mean, like in the Marxist view, right, there's short-term profit motive. It's killing us all. It's not benefiting anyone, and it's not innovating anything. And in my opinion, in the general Marxist opinion, right, like
yeah,
change must happen in the longer term. Like you got to think big, you got to think long, right? Even if perhaps that venture may not be profitable in the short term, it could be profitable in the long run. Like for example, there's a subway line in China, right? It's not necessarily profitable like their high-speed tram thingy. Those high-speed train lines are not exactly profitable,
yeah,
but they help people go from city to city within a matter of a few minutes, and like it contributes to economic activity between differing regions. So
yeah, yeah. I got you. And there's definitely something to be said. I'm agreeing with you, by the way, about having the advantage of a long-term outlook instead of just a short-term, narrowly focused. Like they call it. What is it? Oh, there's a phrase. It's like target. Uh, Target obsession or target lock or something like that, where you've got your target in your sights, which in this case would be the short-term profit, and then you're letting yourself getting sniped from the sides because you're not paying attention to the big picture around you. You're just laser focusing in. You
exactly.
got tunnel vision on this little tiny thing. So you're aiming at this one tiny thing and you're missing the bigger picture that ends up being to your detriment. So in a case like that, where you have a train a form of public transportation that itself is not necessarily profitable, but what it does is it allows more prosperity to be generated among all the entities that the line serves. Then what you have in the big picture is a net benefit, right? A net profit. I'd like to use the word profit. I know maybe they would say, well, no, benefit or something, but yeah, you would basically have a net increase in prosperity and overall well-being of people, despite this one little thing not making a profit. So yeah, and that makes sense. And it is, and there's a lot of capitalist companies out there that end up shooting themselves in the foot and going bankrupt or losing a lot of market share when they just focus on short-term profit, because there's some competitor that has a wider sense of vision and they benefit from having a larger perspective in that particular market or industry. So you see that happen with capitalist companies, with capitalist industries, as well as with public works projects, with planned economies. It can definitely happen in either way. Yeah. Hmm.
Um, there's a particular example, right? I saw a few weeks back, right? I think it was like Shenzhen or something like that. Prior to them getting as much capital as they do right now, right? As much wealth as they do right now. What Xi Jinping did, right, was that like he cut red tape there. Um,
Wait just a second. Ping is the current
yeah,
premier or the current secretary of the Communist Party
yes,
there, right?
yes,
He's the
yes.
boss right now.
Mhm.
Okay, okay.
Like
Yeah, go ahead.
around that time, right? Like the problem was, right, like in the early 90s, was that like you had to go from here to there to get approval to start a business, to get the contracts, the permits, so on and so forth, right? um,
Yeah,
so what he did, right, was that like um, he cut red tape, right, by
I
putting
love
it
that
all
phrase.
into one like center, right? Like uh, he put those centers in multiple places, of course, right? Because it is a big city, but like he made all in one centers, right? So that and he adopted this policy of do it now, right? Like start doing the business, like opening up businesses right now, so that people
Hmm.
can prosper later, right? Like decentralization doesn't always cut red tape, right? It can in certain instances, right? When you have to break up monopolies, for example, but sometimes you do have to centralize, and like you have to bring all the authorization, zoning, and this and that into one center, right? So that there's ease of access and you can get things done faster.
Hmm.
And I mean,
That makes
like,
sense, depending on the
geez, yeah.
scale. Yeah, but I see what you're saying. Depending on the scale, sometimes a certain degree of centralization of a necessary service or permitting process or something like that, or a financing aspect, you can take advantage of economy of scale when you centralize in that regard. Of course, capitalists and free market nuts like me always talk about how decentralization is better. Um, I suppose in certain contexts, and depending on the logistics of some kind of enterprise or activity that you're trying to do, then the centralization thing can be more convenient. Just like how Amazon.com is this big ass company, but it becomes more convenient for you to order everything from just that one place rather than order all of the stuff that you need from 100 different websites, right? So I guess that would make sense. Yeah. But speaking of uh, I want to go back just a little bit here when we were talking about the public supportive markets, because I just noticed a comment that I had written down here. It's from a Pew Research paper, and I want to talk about what the Chinese think about markets in particular, not about private property rights, but this was from 2014, and the Pew Research Center said that roughly 76% of Chinese mainlanders agree that most people are better off in a free market economy. Now, these are people that were polled in 2014. They've grown up since childhood with a Marxist minded education, or at least an education that was controlled by the Communist Party of China. And they are sitting here telling, poll researchers that free markets are good. So that would definitely lend credence to the adaptability thing, because I would say from a most instantiations of Marxism historically, at least before the 21st century, they tended to poo-poo markets. Even when Lenin did the new economic policy, he was like, well, we'll temporarily do some markets, but we'll get away from them again as soon as we can, and this and that. But it seems like a lot of the Chinese populace agrees that markets at least are a good thing. And I know that a lot of people on the left, and I agree to a certain extent, that markets can exist outside of like a capitalism or outside of a private property framework, more or less. Um, so then, but then here's where it comes up to me, where I think that there's a mistake being made here versus like the socialism or the communism versus the capitalism is, you know, they'll say, look, capitalism is just one stage in development. Like you were mentioning earlier, capitalism is one stage in development towards socialism and then towards communism. And we'll do capitalism maybe right now, and then we'll be able to evolve into the socialism, right? But when I see people talking like that, there what I see though happening is that the capitalism is intensifying, and the earlier attempts of socialism, like in the 1950s and 1960s and the 1970s, those attempts to socialize the economy, those are the parts that are withering away. And the capitalist portion, where the private property rights, or at least the market activity and the internationalism and the global trade, those are the parts that are surging and growing and getting bigger and feeding, while the attempts at collective farming and the attempts at collective, steel working, those are the parts that are languishing and atrophying. And those are the things that were already tried. And those were the things, the socialism, China dove headfirst into the socialist mode of production, trying to build that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it ended up not working too well. And then in the 80s, that's when they allowed the private farming. And then in the 90s, they had like a limited stock market appear. And then they said, okay, foreign firms are now allowed to operate in the country. And now today, I think maybe like 8 or 10 years ago, the Communist Party in China is now saying, okay, capitalist business owners are now allowed to join the party. And it's not so much a bad thing if they're a property owner. What we have to look at is their character and how sympathetic they are towards socialism and so on. So they're making more excuses. They're poking more holes into their system to allow the capitalism to kind of soak in like a sponge. That's what I'm seeing happening. I'm sure you disagree with that, but it seems to me like the talk about doing the capitalism temporarily to reach a higher stage of socialism is like it's like waiting for Jesus to come down from heaven. It's never going to happen. What's going to happen instead is the Christianity is going to wither and die eventually, and the atheism is going to surge, just like the attempts at socialism withered away, and now the capitalism is getting everywhere.
Um, well, I mean, it's
That was a
not.
mouthful.
Yeah. Um, well, it's not exactly like that, right? I mean, as we see in America, right? Despite their boastful like claims that they're laissez-faire and this and that, right? They're anything but that. It's more like corporations control their government, right?
A lot of that is happening over here to a degree, yes.
Yeah, like the corporations lobby and rule the government. So it begs into question whether this Puritan version of laissez-faire is even real. Like the way I see it, and as Adam Smith has iterated, right, is that like the so-called free market laissez-faire thingy, it's outside of the control of the people. It's a very lazy form of governance, and that's not exactly what Marxism is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like America seeks to control markets through bullying and imperialism, while China is adopting a completely different policy. What it's saying is that will help, let's say, an African country, right? Uh, Build up on the productive means of the productive forces, right? Um, like we'll build a new shipping port for you guys, right? We'll give you a loan that's even less than, or mostly we'll even forgive it, right? That's the whole thing. They'll make a loan that's less than the IMF or whatnot, because IMF also practices a form
Yeah.
of finance imperialism. They sell whatever they make at really high loans, like their interest rates are really high and whatnot, right? And there's no way these people can pay back, right? China's competing with them, right? And saying, no, we're not going to, like, we're not going to strangle you guys with loans and interest and all that
So they're
other
being more
stuff.
forgiving and more flexible
Yes.
with like
Mhm.
repayments or
Yeah.
forgiving portions of the debt
Yeah.
and
And
that
of
kind of thing,
course,
right?
Africa is like making sure that even China gets benefits from that, right? Like they're having, like if either side does not stand to benefit from it, right, the trade deal does not go on, right? But like the gist of it is right, like that they want to aid Africa in achieving their own independence, right, from this stranglehold of Western imperialism,
Yeah.
and in terms of global policy, right? They discussed it at Davos and whatnot, right? They want unilateralism, like um, a combined effort from each and every country, as opposed to one country bossing around other countries, because we know that's not worked. That hasn't worked, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, like, I mean,
Well,
it goes back to like we can still like Marx, we don't like completely say capitalism is 100% evil, right? We
mhm.
can still thank capitalism for bringing us to where we are right now, right? But the thing is, we have to weed out the internal contradictions within it. We have to weed out the monopolies, and we have to advance beyond what it already is. So that's the whole point of it, right? We can
Yeah.
even bring capitalists into our party if they're sympathetic towards like adopting socialism and moving the idea forward. But like once you reach a certain amount of wealth in China, right, you're held under higher scrutiny, right? Because like there have been cases of fraud and this and that, right? So
Yeah.
those aren't underlooked, right? Because like the people truly do own the government there. It's not like the corporations rule the government and whatnot, despite their wealth and whatnot, right? Corruption still happens everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's not pretend China is some like golden, right? I'm not pretending that it's 100% good or anything like that, right?
Sure.
Nowhere is 100% good. Nowhere is 100% like nowhere like does it run 100% good or efficient or whatnot, right? But like people demand real world like solutions to real world problems, right? And like I feel Marxism helps to bridge the gap between both sides, and
Hmm.
like helps push us towards a new direction, right? Where
Yeah.
we're not constantly at each other's throats, and we can move towards a better world, right?
Cool. You know what? And everyone loves those kind of sentiments, and it's funny how people on with such different political or ideological positions, they agree on those kind of ideas, but then the way they interpret how they should be implemented in the real world can diverge so greatly. And
Hmm.
but I want to talk about Africa briefly. You mentioned it. It's a great topic when it comes to the relationship between Africa and China. I've been reading that the Chinese government and Chinese companies alike have been investing a lot in Africa, and they've been helping build infrastructure. They've been doing a lot of trade. They've been signing deals with companies and other governments on that continent, and everyone's been benefiting. From what I've read, is that Africa's getting more prosperous alongside China in their increased entanglements economically speaking, right? So, and it's cool. It's cool to hear that, they would invest in Africa and then they would be flexible on repayment terms, or they would forgive some of the debt and they would say, look, maybe it's in our mutual shared best interest to forgive X amount of debt, and that way you're not suffocating, and we're not dealing with a failed business partner. You know what I mean? And everyone benefits. And China's got, I think that culturally speaking, China has a lot of pragmatism, right? In the culture, in their thought, in the Confucius kind of thing, and all of that.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I think that most of the world right now, what they see is when they look at China and Africa's cooperation and economic trade, they look at that as a win-win. I think everyone agrees. Like, it's not like Africa's being exploited by China necessarily, even though everyone's profiting off of each other, business-wise. So let me ask you this. When you look at the increased interactions between the Chinese and African economies, do you consider that an example of more free market activity, more capitalist activity, or do you feel like that's more of an example of socialism in action, or a mix? Like how would you interpret it? I would say it's probably a bit of both, but personally, I would say that I think probably the private entities and the free market portion is probably doing the larger share of the interaction between the two places. But I want to get your take on that.
Again, it's complicated, right? It's like China has been dreaming up their Road and Belt initiative for a long time, right? I mean, I would say it's a mix of both, right? Because certain African countries, they do practice capitalism, right? And even they are trading with China. Like, China is not
Mhm.
completely closed off with capitalist nations. It's not under any embargoes or sanctions currently. And
Yeah.
like it's just capitalist countries trading with another market socialist country, and it's um it's a win-win for everyone, really.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it should be. It should, like, but like the so-called laissez-faire of the West, they've just been imperializing and pushing Africans more towards poverty. They have not, like, addressed any actual um, problems related to poverty in Africa, or even within their own nation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, I will admit this, man. It's kind of sad to see, like, for example, the American government says, "Oh, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna go bomb Libya," and then meanwhile, the Communist Party of China, who the Western politicians like to demonize, right? The Communist Party of China says, "Well, we're gonna go trade with African countries. We're not gonna go bomb them," and that's a big difference. It's easy. It was easier, in like the 60s and 70s and 80s to go, oh, well, look at the Soviet Union. They're just as imperialist as the American government. And now that the Soviet Union's gone, now the big kahuna that's self-labeled the communist side isn't the Soviet Union anymore. It's China. But who has China invaded? I mean, okay, so like, yeah, they've done some objectionable things with, like, the Muslims, and they're politically oppressing Hong Kong, and they're threatening Taiwan. But you know what? They haven't invaded Taiwan. America's invaded like 20 countries since the Chinese Communist Revolution happened. How many countries has China invaded during that same time frame, right? Like one. I mean, it's nothing. They saber rattle when it comes to Taiwan because they have a history there of animosity between each other. But it looks like to me like the dovish one, right? The more olive branch holder on the international stage, relatively speaking, would be China rather than America or even Western Europe. I think Western Europe has done more invading than China has during that time frame, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Belgium has, like, I heard it has a company operating in Africa as well, but they don't give back to the African economy at all. They just loot the place. But I mean, the whole situation in Xinjiang, with the Uyghur Muslims and whatnot. The situation is a lot more complicated than
Hmm.
Western media is portraying it as. There's no actual genocide of it, right? Uh, what's happening is like the native Uyghur population in China, uh, they were being terrorized by the separatist Turkic. Like they weren't even native to the region, Turkic Uyghurs. Like they have their own separatist thing, right? That's sponsored by the Turkish government, and
Really,
they
I
were,
didn't know that part.
yeah, they were planning to destabilize the region, and America is lending a hand by spreading this false news about Uyghur persecution and so on and so forth. And um, yeah, I mean, like these people have actually committed real terror acts, right? Bombings and stuff like that. And the native Uyghur people demanded the government that these people should be re-educated, right? They're not putting them in Guantanamo Bay like prisons like America is. They're just giving them a formal education. That's all they're doing.
Hmm.
Um, they're trying to reintegrate them into society.
I've
It's
read about that. Now that's the part I have read about. I wasn't aware of the terrorist acts from the separatists.
Yeah.
I'm gonna Google more into that. And honestly, I haven't looked too deep into this issue because of all the other madness that's been going. There's so much news to
Yeah,
digest lately. It's hard
I
to
know.
keep up with all the nuances and all the intricacies.
Hmm.
But from what I saw, the headlines that I saw, and of course, the only headlines I saw were the Western headlines, right? So you may. You know, you may disagree with some of those headlines that I saw, but what I read was like, first it says, oh, you know, they're sterilizing the Muslims, and they're forcibly trying to integrate them into Chinese society, or Chinese culture, right? I read something about like either language or religious, some prohibition against either the Muslim religion or the Arabic language or something like that, about what they're allowed to teach and stuff. Now, and I personally am an atheist, and I'm not really a fan of any organized religion. But of course, I believe people should be free to express and practice whatever the heck it is they believe. I'm sure you feel the same way. So, is I mean, in your opinion, though, maybe you can educate me and the audience here. Do you believe that let's agree for the sake of argument that there's no genocide happening? I read that there was sterilization and forced like re-educational camp kind of stuff going on, and a forcing them to not practice their religion. Do you disagree with those assertions? Do you say that something else is happening?
Well, firstly, I'm an atheist too, right? Like I left Islam like I think 7 or so years ago. Um,
Congratulations.
yeah, yeah, thanks. But yeah, it's nice to have things in common, right? But
Yeah.
the majority of these reports, right, of so-called concentration camps, forced sterilization, they all come from this one anonymous author, right? Uh, uh, who lives in Germany. His name is Adrian Zentz, right? And he's a very unhinged fellow. He has to write, obviously, right, to make a living, right? But like,
Is he just
it,
sensationalizing to get more
yes,
clicks, you think?
yeah, basically, right? But like Western media is eating it up. The majority of stuff he says would not pass in Western media because he's a very unhinged fellow who believes that God spoke to him and he
Oh
commanded
no.
him to wage a holy war against China and this and that. And he also wrote some anti-Semitic things in his book. So he's one of those kind of people, right? And he's not visited China once, right? He's taught Chinese students supposedly, right, English and German and whatnot, but he's never been there. So much of his things is unsubstantiated. He's got no evidence for his claims, and yeah,
Jesus. So it sounds like he's some kind of evangelical Walter Duranty or something,
yeah,
where
that's
he's
exactly what he is.
yeah, but instead of whitewashing atrocities, he's trying to stir up or exaggerate something, or come up with atrocities that aren't happening, or you know what I mean, right? Like where he's trying to distort the lens, I guess. Anyway, I'm gonna have to Google it because honestly, I haven't read that much into the issue. I've only seen a few headlines on my news feed about the Muslims in China in particular. So I'll take your word for it on the for now, but I'll look into it, after our call.
Yeah, now with the case of Hong Kong, right? China didn't, the mainland didn't exactly oppress or anything like that, right? Hong Kong was once a part of China, but like Britain took over it. It's been a British colony for a
Yeah,
while, right? But the
yeah, I know the
contract,
history of that.
yeah,
Yeah,
the contract ended with the whole Britain takes most of the slice of the pie thingy, right? And the majority of Hong Kong mainlanders actually wanted to go back and have some semblance of unity with mainland China. And
yeah.
like the whole not yellow jacket, that was France, right? But like the whole uh, protest movement and whatnot,
Mhm.
it wasn't a revolution or anything. It wasn't like some like the majority of the population disagreed. It was yet another American-backed color revolution to destabilize the regions. Like currently, like the Joe Biden administration released report or whatnot, right? Not a report, like a document, right? In which they highlighted the need to destabilize certain regions like Xinjiang and Tibet, right? So that they can gain the upper hand in China. They're not stopping with Trump's xenophobia of China and whatnot,
Mm.
right? They want to further intensify it. They're just as war hawkish as the Republicans, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're not going to stop with the whole trade war and the it's senseless nonsense, right? It's the whole administration and everything is full of senile old, you know,
They
like
get older every election, man.
I know, right?
Next year, we're going to elect some. I mean, next election, America's going to elect a 90-year-old to office. Just watch.
It's completely senseless bullshit. They could be signing trade agreements like China is with other nations, and they
Yeah.
could be prospering, right, mutually. But instead, they're sabotaging vaccine, like uh, vaccine trading globally, and they're trying to sabotage different regions so they could continue with the endless wars that they've been, you know, like
Yeah. I,
that.
I agree with you there that it's total nonsense and it's counterproductive. And I would say that I would say that it's disappointing that Trump set the bar so low that an improvement on Trump still ends up being this war hawk madman, just maybe a little bit more diluted by like a little bit watered down ever so slightly. But I'm a little bit more familiar about the recent Hong Kong protests than I am about the Muslim question. I've been to Hong Kong, and I have a lot of friends that are from there that moved to America as young adults and stuff. And now I remember I actually watched on TV the ceremony when the UK handed Hong Kong over to China, and they had all these cool like fireworks and displays and stuff. It was a big hullabaloo. And initially, that happened in the 90s. Now, for the first 10 or 15 years, everyone was really happy to discover that the mainland mainland China decided to do the one country two systems policy, where they basically left the economic rules in Hong Kong. They didn't mess with those. They let Hong Kong keep doing its economic thing. And that's, man, I'll tell you what, man, I live right next to Beverly Hills, okay? And I grew up seeing Rolls Royces and Maseratis and Bentleys and Lamborghinis just every day, because I'm where all these fancy cars are. So they don't really impress me. But when I went to Hong Kong, man, I was actually impressed, because it's not like you just see five Maseratis a day like you do in Beverly Hills. In Hong Kong, man, everything's a Maserati. Everything was a Rolls Royce. Like the ratio of supercars and super expensive cars, it was the highest in Hong Kong that I have ever seen. It's higher than in Beverly Hills. You'll see more Toyota Corollas as a ratio of the cars, right, in Beverly Hills than you'll see in Hong Kong. I mean, every car there was just super fancy, super expensive. And I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of wealth in this place. You know, I mean, like I had always known in the abstract that Hong Kong was a wealthy city, but when I went there in person, I was blown away. And it's really got its thing going on economically speaking. You know, I mean, it's like it's a financial hub, it's a banking center globally speaking, and they have very low like tariffs and transaction fees, and that's a big part of why you know the wealth accumulates so much there. But uh, from what I saw with the whole recent protests, it wasn't that the mainland was even trying to mess with the economic aspect. Sorry, there's something going on outside my door. But they were messing with the whole democratic and who's in control aspect, and it was that the mainland wanted to bring some mainlanders into the leadership of Hong Kong, and that's why the Hong Kong residents felt like they were being those leaders were being shoved down their throats and that they weren't allowed to choose Hong Kong leaders. So it was more a question of rulership and democracy, not so much like messing with the economy or oppressing people. And the only thing they oppressed were the protests against it, right? But I mean, I don't know, man. It seems there's like a bit of tribalism. I'm not a fan of tribalism, but it's like who cares if mainlanders are in charge as long as they allow the Hong Kong system to do what it wants, I suppose. But maybe there was more to that I wasn't catching. But of course, I mean, if I like people trying to make their own choices when it comes to self determination, but from what I've seen, the mainland never really wanted to mess with Hong Kong's economic situation or ruin the good thing that they have going on there in terms of their quality of life, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like, of course, right? Like, I can understand maybe some frustration, right, about like not having Hong Kong representatives and so on and so forth. Sure, I mean, protests about that, right? But like from what we've seen, right, with those protests, riots, or whatnot in Hong Kong, right, many of them were carrying American flags or white nationalist um, stuff and whatnot, right? And
I
like,
saw a lot of American flags. I didn't see very much white nationalist flags,
not
but
very much. They were peppered here and there, right? But
okay.
it was not very distinguishable from what we saw at Capitol Hill. Um, like the
Yeah, all they were
the
missing was the buffalo
rioters,
horn guy.
yeah, the rioters did not make any legitimate demands, right? And it was practically an astroturf movement. Their leader was not even Hong Kong. He wasn't even a Hong Konger. He was American.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. Well,
So
there's that.
I mean,
Wow.
yeah, like I'm all for like different regions being independent and whatnot, right? But like we have to examine all the facts, right, before we can draw conclusions. Like, yeah, I mean, like just like how China chooses to govern, right? It chooses to govern pragmatically in both the economic sphere and like that's what I've adopted now, right? I've adopted this pragmatic thinking as opposed to the very dogmatic thinking that I used to have, right? That things must be this way and people must like, you know, adopt things that way and so on and so forth. And I've also come to criticize certain previous judgments I made or like self-criticism is it's a very good thing, right? You'd probably agree, right?
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah.
mhm, right, like many anarchists would think that the revolution is like 100% pure liberatory thingy, right? Like I actually wagered, remember the pure anarchist philosophies group?
Yes, I remember that
I
group.
made a wager with them, right? I quoted Engels, right, where he
Uh-huh.
said that a revolution is inherently an authoritarian act, right? It's just like Marxists don't necessarily find a problem with that, right? They
Yeah.
understand that like industrial revolution, agricultural revolution, so on and so forth. We had to, there was authority, right? An authority of one group over another, right? So that there could be societal change, right? I wagered that like they too were authoritarian in a sense because they wanted to force their will on an, and while they removed me. So
Uh,
I
that's
mean, yeah, but like Marxism isn't exactly dogmatic, as you can see, right? Like we understand the authoritarian nature of ourselves, right? But like we embrace it so that it could lead to proper change. You get what I mean, right?
yes, I get what you mean. And I like the nuance in that too. And,
Hmm.
like I touched on before, it's refreshing to hear those kind of ideas from from a Marxist and how they interpret the Marxist ideology. It makes it sound more adaptable, more pro evolution. I mean, in an economic sense or a societal sense, as society progresses and moves forward and goes through stages and so on. It's funny because uh, a lot of times when if you Google like is China more capitalist or communist, most of the articles that you read, not all of them, but most of the articles that you read, especially a lot of them from leftist authors, they'll either say, "Hey, no, China's 100% capitalist. It's total state capitalism," and then you'll have some other writers that'll say, "Oh, especially the ones on the right, they'll say, no, China's totally communist and it needs capitalism and it's just a backwards, socialist dictatorial state." And of course, of course, I say you and I seem to agree that it's much more complex than that. There's more nuance than that, and it's not so black and white. It's not so dogmatic. There's pragmatism involved. There's a lot of aspects of both, and depending on where you look, and that's the more refreshing part. I had an idea. I had a sense that you and I would probably have a similar position in that regard. What I wanted to do, of course, in this debate was argue, yeah, well, all the best parts of China are the capitalist parts, and all the shitty parts of China are the socialist parts, and you argue the opposite. So, and it reminds me of this one quote that I heard, and I don't know if it's like Confucius or what, but it talks about like whenever anything cool happens in society, the socialists and the capitalists both go, oh no, that's because my ideology is responsible for whatever cool happened. And then when something crappy happens in society, everyone disavows it. Oh, that had nothing to do with my ideology. And it's like success has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan, right? Everyone wants to claim fatherhood of whatever was successful, and whatever fails, no one wants to claim any responsibility for. That's not my kid. So it's funny having this, thinking about these ideas and, well, why is the prosperity happening? Is that mostly thanks to, Marxist ideology applying itself in the real world pragmatically, or is that thanks to free markets and private property rights? And recently I watched a debate from some well-known YouTubers, Vosh and Caleb Maupin. Now they're both lefties, but Caleb is way more of like a dogmatic one, and Vosh is more like a liberal neo-lib. I know you know who Vosh is. I know you're not a fan of him, but here's what's funny,
Ay,
man. If
ay,
you
ay.
watch that debate, they spend a great deal of time accusing each other of being a capitalist, and then during the debate, they spent a lot of time talking about. They were arguing that the USA is more communist than China is, because they had wrapped themselves in such circles, and they start, and they buy in. Both of those guys buy into the neoliberal analysis of China, and like they believe the same headlines that I read, whereas you'll have a more skeptical eye towards it. So they wrap themselves in a circle, and they're talking like, well, the USA is more communist than China has because the USA has better worker protections and better this and that and more ownership and this and that. I was really laughing through that whole debate because both of those guys are dogmatic. Vosh is like a dogmatic neo-lib from Seattle, and Caleb is like a dogmatic, like he's a Stalinist, I swear. Neither of those guys have the nuance and the refreshing perspective that someone like you has, which I enjoy, and it's one of the reasons I enjoy having these discussions with you. Anyway, man, you know what? But it's already been like an hour, which is
Yeah,
crazy
yeah.
to me. And
Hmm.
I feel like we still have a lot more cool stuff we can talk about. So maybe we'll arrange another video sometime in the near
Yeah,
future, huh?
definitely for sure.
Cool.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah. Look, man. Before we wrap it up, I'd like to give
Hmm.
you the last word. Of course, I said why I think that the cool parts in China are capitalist. If you want to give a quick closing statement, and then we'll end the video.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't argue that like capitalism is completely uncool, right? Like
Mhm.
Shenzhen did generate a lot of wealth for China, and it was relatively like capitalist, I would assume, because it's a special economic zone, right? That's the whole purpose of capitalism, to generate enough wealth.
Sure.
But like it must it must turn into socialism eventually. That's the whole
Mm,
gist of it, right? That's the purpose of the Communist Party in China, uh, to lead this transition, right? And because like again, it's not dogmatic; it's being pragmatic. It's like you guys can build your businesses, but you got to follow our labor laws and so on and so forth, right? Like I have no, like I don't view you as an enemy or so on and so forth, right? Even though
yeah,
we may
likewise.
have completely different uh, like even if we take different political stances, right? Like I don't view you as an enemy and whatnot. Like people can work together even if they're in completely different, like even if they believe completely different things, right? Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, like to a previous point you said, like I was thinking the same thing, right? We see the same problems, right? But we've taken different paths,
Yeah.
right? hmm Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot, right? I'm like, hey, hold on.
It's cool, you know, and here's one thing I want to say about human progress, improving the well-being of everyone, not just the
Yeah.
elites. It's
Mhm.
it's when I think a big part of the solution to that problem is when people with very diverging beliefs manage to find common ground that they both agree are going to be good for everybody, and work on those common areas and focus on that, right? When it comes to at least the real world stuff. And it's fun to like, it's fun to attack each other on the differences that we have and make the memes and do the slam dunks on the internet. And I enjoy that definitely. But when it comes to the real world stuff, when it's time to work, and when it's time to consume, and when it's time to educate the next generation and stuff like that, and improve society as a whole, when people like us, when we find those common grounds, when we realize that, hey, despite our ideological differences, we're not enemies, and there's a lot of ways that we can make a friendship happen, and make trade happen, and satisfy each other's economic needs and so on. Whether it's China and Africa trading, or whether it's North America and Asia trading. Those are the things. When people do those things, that's how we're going to make society better for everyone, whether you're
Yep.
capitalist or communist. And that's how altogether, right, we get closer to post scarcity, we get closer to eliminating poverty, to eliminating pandemics and viruses, and
hmm
finding solutions to all these problems that affect all of us, because these problems don't care if you're capitalist or communist, they affect humans,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
and
If
and and that's how we all move forward. And I'm glad when people can discuss their differences and find those common grounds, and work from there.
Yep. Exactly. Right. Yeah. It was great talking with you.
Cool. Likewise, Z. Thanks so much. And everyone, I hope you
Yeah.
guys enjoyed the conversation. We'll hopefully we'll have another video of us two yapping back and forth coming up soon. And man, it was a pleasure.
Yep. Right.
All right. Peace out.